The morning was quiet inside the tall glass building, with workers moving quickly through the lobby, carrying coffee cups, tapping on their phones, or rushing toward elevators before they closed. The company was always busy at this hour, full of noise and energy, but on this particular day, something unusual was happening. A stranger had entered the lobby, a calm, well-dressed black man wearing a clean suit, a simple watch, and holding a plain folder in his hand. He didn't look nervous, he didn't look confused, he didn't look like someone lost. He simply walked in with quiet confidence, as if he belonged there more than anyone else in the room. People noticed him, but only in the way people notice someone they think they don't need to think much about. A receptionist looked up, smiled politely, and asked him if he needed help. He replied gently, "I'm here for the meeting." His voice was soft but steady, the kind that made people listen even though it wasn't loud. The receptionist nodded, thinking he was maybe an applicant or someone visiting the wrong floor. She pointed him toward the waiting area near the boardroom entrance. He thanked her and walked there calmly, taking a seat in one of the chairs. Around him, employees whispered as they walked past. Some looked at his clothes, expecting a designer name but seeing nothing flashy. Others saw the plain folder in his hand and assumed it held a resume or documents for an interview. A group of junior employees walked by and whispered, "Maybe he's here for an entry-level position." Another said quietly, "He doesn't look like someone who belongs in the executive meeting." Their words weren't cruel, but they carried a hidden assumption. An assumption the stranger noticed but didn't react to. The man simply sat there quietly watching people walk by. His eyes were sharp, observant, and thoughtful. He didn't check his phone, he didn't shift nervously. He sat with the calmness of someone who had faced much bigger rooms, much stronger personalities, and much more difficult situations than this lobby. But no one knew that because no one bothered to ask. That morning he was invisible, not because he wasn't important, but because people didn't look deeply enough to see who he really was. A janitor pushing a cleaning cart passed by and greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning." The stranger smiled back softly. "Good morning." Just those two words were exchanged, but the janitor felt a sense of respect from the man that many executives in the building didn't show. He nodded and continued his work, feeling strangely good after that simple interaction. Meanwhile, upstairs, a very important meeting was being prepared. The company's leadership team was expecting the arrival of a new CEO. Someone headquarters had hired secretly to evaluate the company from the inside before officially taking charge. No one knew his face. No one knew his name except a few officials. The plan was for the new CEO to observe the company quietly, watch how people behaved, and understand which leaders treated others with fairness and which abused their authority. What no one expected was that the new CEO had arrived earlier than planned, and was already sitting quietly downstairs. The stranger in the lobby knew exactly what was happening. He knew people were assuming he was someone small, someone unimportant, someone without a title or power. He saw it in their glances, their rushed greetings, their polite but distant smiles. But he didn't mind. He wanted to see how the company behaved before they knew who he was. He wanted to see the truth, and truth often revealed itself in moments like these. Quiet hallways, passing faces, and unspoken judgments. As he waited, a few employees walked by holding laptops and talking loudly about numbers and presentations. One of them bumped into him slightly without saying sorry, too busy practicing a speech about company values. The stranger simply moved aside, his expression calm, his patience unbroken. He had seen behavior like this many times before. In companies where people smiled upward but frowned downward, where respect depended on job titles, where kindness was selective. He wondered whether this company would be the same or different. Minutes passed, and the stranger checked the time on his simple watch. He still had time before the meeting officially began. Across the lobby, a group of interns stood together whispering. One of them pointed at him subtly and said, "Maybe he's lost." Another said, "Or maybe he's here for maintenance or delivery." The stranger heard their guesses but didn't show any reaction. He had learned long ago that people reveal their hearts not by how they treat the powerful, but by how they treat the ones they think are powerless. Every sound in the lobby, ringing phones, clicking heels, elevator chimes, felt like a small test. The stranger noticed everything, every voice, every frown, every smile. He wasn't judging the workers, but he was observing, quietly and carefully. The company's culture was on display right in front of him, the good and the bad, the respectful and the dismissive, and he was taking mental notes, because soon he would be the man responsible for changing all of it. As he waited patiently, unaware employees continued walking past him, never imagining that the stranger sitting silently in the lobby, the man they didn't bother to ask about, the man they didn't treat with importance, was the very person who would soon hold the highest seat in the building, the man who would decide their promotions, their policies, their future. And downstairs in that quiet lobby, before any introductions, before any grand announcement, before his title was revealed, the new CEO simply sat, watching, learning, and preparing for the moment that would change everything. The stranger sat quietly in the lobby, but the atmosphere around him slowly began to shift when a man in a gray suit walked out of the hallway with a loud voice that seemed to fill the entire space. This man was the floor manager, known throughout the company for his strict behavior, short temper, and the belief that authority made him better than everyone else. He walked with the confidence of someone who thought he owned the building, every step sharp, every expression proud. He paused for a moment when he noticed the stranger sitting calmly near the boardroom entrance. The manager frowned, staring at him with the kind of look people give when they assume something without knowing anything. In his mind, the stranger didn't look like someone important. Not the way he defined importance. The stranger wasn't wearing a designer label, wasn't holding a laptop, wasn't sweating nervously like applicants usually did. Instead, he sat with a calmness that bothered the manager even more, because people who didn't fear him always irritated him. The manager approached with a fake smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Excuse me," he said sharply, "can I help you with something?" The stranger looked up politely. "I'm here for the meeting," he said calmly. The manager blinked, confused. "Meeting?" he repeated as if the word tasted strange. "Which meeting exactly?" His tone already held judgment, already held the assumption that this man must be in the wrong place. "The executive meeting," the stranger replied simply. The manager's smile disappeared instantly, replaced by disbelief and irritation. He crossed his arms and said, "Sir, this area is reserved for upper management and company leaders. Guests or applicants wait downstairs." His voice was loud enough for nearby employees to hear. Two interns passing by slowed down to watch, pretending to fix their lanyards just so they could stay close. The stranger remained calm. "I was told to wait here," he said softly. But the manager shook his head quickly. "Told by whom?" he snapped. "No one should have directed you to this area, only executives belong here." His eyes traveled from the stranger's watch to his plain folder, and he made a conclusion without asking a single relevant question. He had judged the man in less than 10 seconds, as he often did with everyone he considered beneath him. The stranger stayed polite, not raising his voice, not correcting him, not revealing anything. "I assure you," he said gently, "I'm in the right place." The manager laughed under his breath and leaned closer as if speaking to a child. "Listen. This is a high-level meeting," he said. "You can't just walk in, you can't just sit here, you need an invitation or a clearance badge." Some employees nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. One whispered, "He didn't even ask who the man is." Another replied, "You know how he is, always judging, always assuming." But both stayed quiet, afraid of the manager's reputation. The stranger didn't look offended, his expression stayed peaceful, even respectful. But the more calm he remained, the more annoyed the manager became, because people who didn't cower made him feel insecure, threatened. This stranger wasn't shaking, wasn't apologizing, wasn't embarrassed, and that bothered him deeply. "Sir," the manager said finally, his patience thinning, "I'll have to ask you to move. You can wait downstairs or outside until someone calls you." The stranger looked at him for a long moment, his eyes thoughtful. "I prefer to stay here," he said gently. "This is where I was told to wait." The manager's face tightened, the polite mask cracking. "Told by who?" he demanded loudly, startling even the receptionist. Everyone now watched the scene unfold like a slow, uncomfortable movie. But the stranger simply said, "Someone from headquarters?" The manager chuckled and shook his head. "Headquarters?" he repeated sarcastically. "Headquarters wouldn't send someone like you without informing us first." His voice dripped disrespect, assuming the stranger didn't belong simply because of how he looked, his skin, his calmness, his simplicity. Everything triggered the manager's hidden prejudice. He stepped even closer and whispered sharply, "I don't know who you think you are, but you need to leave this area now." The stranger didn't get angry, he only asked, "Are you sure you want me to leave?" That question made the manager explode inside. He felt mocked, challenged, disrespected. When in reality the stranger had simply asked a question. "Yes, I'm sure," the manager snapped loudly. "This area is for executives only, not for people wandering around pretending they belong here." The lobby fell completely silent. Employees stared, unsure, uncomfortable. Many of them felt the sting of the manager's words, but they didn't speak up. They had learned that silence was safer. The stranger stood slowly, his posture steady, his expression unchanged. "Very well," he said softly, "if that is what you want." He stepped back from the boardroom entrance, not arguing, not defending himself, not revealing who he truly was. And as he walked a few steps away, the manager felt victorious, proud, certain he had done the right thing. But almost everyone else watching felt uneasy, because something about the stranger's calmness didn't feel like defeat. It felt like patience, like someone waiting for the right moment, like someone who knew something the manager didn't. and that something was about to turn the entire company upside down. The manager stood with his arms crossed, feeling proud of himself as the stranger stepped aside. He didn't realize that the entire lobby was watching him with uncomfortable expressions. Some shook their heads quietly, others whispered to one another. He didn't even ask the man's name, but the manager didn't notice. He only cared about showing he was in control, showing authority, showing that he decided who belonged and who didn't. The stranger moved to the far side of the hallway, standing calmly near a window. He didn't look angry or embarrassed, he didn't argue, he didn't try to explain himself. Instead, he simply waited like a man who knew patience was stronger than pride. His eyes followed the people walking by, and each person who passed felt a strange sense of respect for him, something they couldn't explain. His silence carried more power than the manager's loud voice. A young employee who had seen everything approached cautiously. "Sir, are you sure you don't want to report him to HR?" she asked in a quiet voice. "He shouldn't have spoken to you like that." The stranger smiled gently. "It's all right," he said calmly. "Sometimes people judge too quickly." His voice was so peaceful that the employee felt her shoulders relax. She nodded and walked away, still confused but somehow impressed. Meanwhile, the manager marched toward the boardroom, proud of how he kept order. He straightened his tie, adjusted his suit jacket, and pushed the door open with unnecessary confidence. Inside, executives sat around a long wooden table, whispering anxiously. They were waiting for the new CEO who was supposed to arrive any minute. No one had seen him before, and the anticipation made the room tense. The manager entered and clapped his hands loudly. "Everyone listen up," he said. "I made sure the lobby was cleared, no disturbances, no strangers hanging around the meeting room. Everything is under control." Some of the executives nodded politely, others barely paid attention. They were too focused on the arrival of the CEO, whose leadership could mean big changes. Promotions, demotions, restructuring, all of them were nervous, trying to guess what kind of person the new CEO might be. The manager took his seat near the front, feeling accomplished. He had no idea that the very man he chased out of the hallway was the one they were waiting for. The irony danced around him like a shadow no one had pointed out yet. The stranger's calm face kept appearing in his mind, but he dismissed it quickly. He didn't belong, he told himself again and again. "I did the right thing." Downstairs, the stranger continued waiting. He looked at his watch. 5 minutes left before the meeting officially started. He wasn't upset, he wasn't in a rush. He knew everything would unfold exactly as it should. All he needed to do was wait for the right moment, and he had learned across his entire career that timing was the strongest part of leadership. The receptionist glanced over at him again, feeling uneasy. She finally gathered the courage to walk over. "Sir, I'm sorry if the manager was rude," she whispered nervously. "He can be strict." The stranger gave a soft smile. "Don't worry," he said kindly. "People reveal who they are in small moments." The receptionist blinked, absorbing the meaning. "Would you like some water while you wait?" "That would be nice," he said politely. She hurried to bring him a glass, and when she returned, she bowed her head slightly in apology. He accepted the water, and she left, feeling strangely humbled. Upstairs, the environment inside the boardroom grew heavier. "Why isn't the new CEO here yet?" the financial head asked, tapping his pen anxiously. Another executive replied, "Headquarters said he might arrive quietly, maybe even unannounced." The manager scoffed, "Well, he certainly didn't show up downstairs, I checked." Some executives exchanged glances. Something about the manager's tone felt wrong, too confident, too sure. But before anyone could question him, the door opened slightly and a representative from headquarters stepped in, carrying a digital tablet. "Good morning," she said. "The new CEO is here." A rush of excitement filled the room. Papers rustled, suits straightened, smiles appeared. The manager sat up straight, fixing his hair, ready to impress the incoming leader. "Please bring him in," said the executive director, his voice trembling with anticipation. But the representative shook her head. "He will walk in himself," she said, "in just a moment." Downstairs, the stranger took one final breath of quiet air. He set his glass on the table, adjusted his jacket, and began walking toward the elevators. His footsteps were calm, steady, confident. Not the confidence of ego, but the confidence of truth. Because the man who had been removed, the man who had been ignored, the man who had been judged by his appearance, was about to walk into the boardroom as the highest authority in the entire building. And every person who had doubted him, including the manager, was about to learn exactly who he was. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and the stranger stepped out with the same calmness he had shown in the lobby. His footsteps were steady, slow, unhurried. Yet somehow the air around him felt different now, as if he carried a presence that quietly filled the hallway. Employees passing by suddenly stood straighter, unsure why, sensing something important. something they couldn't yet name, but the stranger didn't look at anyone. His eyes focused only on the boardroom door ahead of him. Inside the boardroom, tension thickened with every passing second. Executives adjusted their ties, cleared their throats, straightened their files. Everyone wanted to make a perfect first impression. The manager sat confidently in his chair, arms folded, ready to speak the moment the CEO entered. He practiced lines inside his head. "Welcome, sir. We've kept everything in order. I personally ensured no interruptions." In his mind, he pictured himself receiving praise, maybe even a promotion. Someday he had no idea how wrong he was. The headquarters representative looked down at her tablet and said, "He's on this floor now." A wave of nervous energy swept through the room. A few people smoothed their shirts, some sat up taller, others whispered to each other in excitement. The manager smirked, whispering to the colleague next to him, "Finally, someone important, not like that guy downstairs." He laughed quietly, but the colleague didn't laugh with him. Instead, he gave a strange look, uneasy, uncertain, almost as if he sensed something was about to go terribly wrong. Outside, the stranger reached the boardroom door. He paused for a moment, placing his hand gently on the handle. He wasn't nervous. He had been in rooms far more intense, far more dangerous, far more political than this one, but he also knew what awaited inside. Faces expecting someone else, minds full of assumptions, hearts unprepared for truth. He breathed in slowly and pushed the door open. The room fell completely silent. Every eye locked onto him at once. Chairs stopped moving, hands froze in midair. Even the ticking clock on the wall felt louder. For a long moment, no one spoke. The executives looked confused, shocked, unsure. They recognized the man. They had seen him downstairs, the person sitting quietly, the man no one treated with importance. They stared at him now with open mouths, trying to understand what he was doing here. The manager's smile disappeared instantly. He blinked fast, sitting up sharply, unable to believe what he was seeing. "You?" he blurted out before he could stop himself. "What are you doing here?" His voice cracked slightly, a mix of confusion and irritation, but mostly fear, because deep inside, a small voice whispered that something was terribly wrong. The headquarters representative stepped forward with a composed smile. "Everyone," she announced clearly, "please welcome your new CEO." Her words struck the room like lightning. Gasps erupted, chairs scraped the floor, papers almost fell off the table. The manager's face turned pale, his jaw dropped open so wide he forgot to close it. He stared at the stranger, no, at the CEO, as if he had just seen a ghost. His mind raced frantically, replaying every second of their encounter downstairs, every rude word, every assumption, every careless insult. His stomach twisted painfully, his confidence shattered in an instant. Meanwhile, the executive stood up respectfully. "Sir, welcome," one of them said nervously, bowing slightly. Another stuttered. "We didn't realize." But the new CEO simply lifted his hand gently, signaling them to relax. His calmness was more powerful than any raised voice. He walked toward the table, each step steady, each movement controlled. But beneath that calm surface was a quiet storm of disappointment and clarity. The CEO took his seat at the head of the table, the chair reserved only for the highest authority in the company. The entire room watched him in silence, afraid to even breathe too loudly. They had no idea how he would react, no idea what kind of leader he was, no idea if he would fire the manager on the spot or call security immediately. The manager forced himself to stand, his hands shaking slightly. "Sir, I'm so sorry, I didn't know, I didn't realize, I thought." He struggled, his voice stumbling over excuses. This was the first time anyone had seen him scared, the first time his arrogance broke, the first time he understood what it felt like to be small. The CEO looked up at him with calm, steady eyes, the same eyes that watched everything earlier, the same eyes that saw the truth before anyone else did. He didn't shout, he didn't insult him, he didn't raise his voice. Instead, he asked one simple question, spoken softly but cutting deeper than any criticism. "And tell me, what made you think I didn't belong in that meeting?" The room froze. No typing, no whispering, no shifting. Just silence, heavy, sharp, exposing everything. The manager swallowed hard, unable to answer. Because the truth stood right in front of him. And for the first time in his life he had no defense. And the CEO watched him with quiet disappointment, knowing that this moment was only the beginning of a much bigger change the company desperately needed. The question hung in the air like a heavy weight no one could lift. "What made you think I didn't belong in that meeting?" the CEO repeated softly, his eyes never leaving the manager's face. The words were calm, but they struck with the force of a hammer. The room felt smaller, the walls seemed to close in, and every person watching held their breath, waiting for the manager to speak. But he couldn't. His throat tightened, his mouth opened and closed without sound, his face burned with embarrassment because deep down, beneath all the excuses he wanted to invent, the truth sat like a stone in his stomach. He judged the man the moment he saw him, judged his clothes, his silence, his skin, his lack of flashy accessories, judged him without asking a single question, without giving him a chance to speak. The CEO leaned back in his chair, his hands folded, his expression patient but disappointed. He didn't need to raise his voice because silence, in moments like this, was stronger than anger. The manager finally stammered, "Sir, I thought you were, I assumed," but the words fell apart. They didn't mean anything and everyone in the room knew it. The executives watched uncomfortably, some looked down, others glanced at each other. They too were guilty in small ways, of not questioning the manager, of letting him act however he pleased, of accepting his arrogance because it was easier than confronting him. Now they felt exposed, as if the CEO's question wasn't just for the manager, but for the entire culture of the company. The CEO finally broke the silence. "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "People make mistakes." His tone was gentle, but the message beneath it was unmistakably firm. "But mistakes in leadership are dangerous." He looked around the room, letting his eyes meet each person's for a moment. When a leader judges someone without listening, everyone suffers. A few executives lowered their heads, ashamed, others nodded slowly, absorbing the truth they had ignored for too long. The CEO turned back to the manager. "Tell me," he said again, "when you saw me sitting in the lobby, did you think to ask who I was?" The manager whispered, "No, sir." "Did you think to ask why I was there?" "No, sir." "Did you think to ask if I needed help?" "No, sir." The CEO tapped his finger lightly on the table. "Instead, you told me I didn't belong," he said. "You told me to leave." The manager shut his eyes tightly, as if the memory itself hurt him. The CEO continued, "You didn't check my name, you didn't check the invitation list, you didn't speak to anyone at headquarters. You simply assumed." His voice softened even further. "And assumptions can destroy more than respect. They can destroy opportunity." The room remained silent, hanging on every word. The manager felt smaller with each sentence, shrinking in the chair that once made him feel powerful. He had spent years treating employees with sharp criticism, giving respect only to those above him, ignoring the rest, and now for the first time he was forced to see how wrong he had been. Then the CEO did something unexpected, something no one predicted. He didn't scold the manager further. Instead, he said, "I'm not here to punish you." His voice was almost gentle. "I'm here to understand why this company behaves this way." He looked around the room again. "Because if one leader acts like this, others might too." Executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, realizing this wasn't just about the manager, it was about the entire culture. A culture shaped by fear, pride, and quick judgment. The CEO saw it clearly, saw how people treated those they considered less important, saw how kindness only flowed upward, not downward. The CEO straightened in his chair, his tone becoming firm but fair. "Before we continue with the business meeting," he said, "we will address this company's behavior." His words echoed through the room. "Respect," he said slowly, "is not a luxury, it is a requirement." The manager finally gathered enough courage to speak. "Sir, I am deeply sorry," he said sincerely. "I was wrong. I acted unfairly. I let my position blind me." His voice shook, but his apology was real. He wasn't trying to save himself anymore. He genuinely felt shame. The CEO nodded gently. "I accept your apology," he said, "but apologies alone don't fix systems." He paused. "Change does." Everyone knew the next part would decide the manager's fate, and possibly the future of the company too. Because the CEO wasn't just asking questions now. He was about to set consequences. Consequences that would reveal whether this company deserved to move forward under his leadership, or whether everything needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. The CEO's words carried through the room like a quiet storm. Soft, calm, but impossible to ignore. The executives sat frozen, staring at him as if he were holding a mirror up to all of them, showing pieces of themselves they never wanted to see. The manager felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, his hands trembling slightly against the table. He braced himself, expecting the CEO to fire him instantly, to call security, to humiliate him the way he had humiliated the man he now knew was his boss. But the CEO didn't rush, he didn't shout, he didn't use anger as a weapon. Instead, he leaned forward with steady eyes and said, "This company cannot grow if its leaders shrink others." The words were simple, but they held more power than the manager's loudest commands. The manager swallowed hard, unable to meet his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt what his employees must have felt under his leadership. Fear, uncertainty, shame. He had spent so long looking down on others that he never once imagined what it felt like from the other side. The CEO continued, "When someone walks into this company, even if you don't know their name, you treat them with respect." His voice carried a firmness that made even the walls seem to listen. "A leader doesn't judge first. A leader listens first." The executives nodded slowly, absorbing each word like students learning an important lesson. One of them whispered under his breath, "He's right." Another said quietly, "We've been afraid of the wrong people." The CEO then turned back to the manager. "I'm going to ask you something," he said softly. "Do you understand why your behavior today was dangerous?" The manager nodded immediately. "Yes, sir," his voice shaky. "I judged without asking, I acted on assumptions, I disrespected someone I didn't know, and I embarrassed the company." "And?" the CEO asked gently as if encouraging him to dig deeper. The manager took a shaky breath. "And? I failed as a leader," his voice broke. "I let pride decide for me." The CEO nodded slowly, approving the honesty, not the behavior. "Good," he said quietly. "Awareness is the first step." The room felt lighter for a moment, but tension quickly returned. The question of consequences still hung in the air. Everyone waited, eyes locked on the CEO, wondering what he would decide. He finally spoke, "You will step down from your position for now." The words hit the manager like a sudden drop. His shoulders slumped, his eyes lowered. He knew this was coming, but hearing it aloud still stung. His pride collapsed completely, leaving behind only guilt, regret, and humility. But before the manager could sink too deeply, the CEO added, "However, I do not believe in destroying people for a single mistake." A collective gasp rippled through the room. The manager looked up slowly, unsure if he heard correctly. The CEO continued, "You are not fired." The manager blinked, confused. "Sir, I'm not." "No," the CEO said firmly, "but you will be removed from leadership duties." The manager nodded, accepting it, his voice barely above a whisper, "I understand." The CEO wasn't finished. "For the next 3 months," he said, "you will attend mandatory leadership training, empathy workshops, and company culture development programs." Whispers spread around the room, surprised but impressed. The CEO's approach wasn't revenge. It was transformation. "You will learn," the CEO added softly, "how to lead without fear, without ego, without prejudice." The manager nodded quickly, tears forming in his eyes, not because of the punishment, but because of the grace he didn't expect. "Thank you, sir," he whispered, voice trembling. "Thank you for giving me a chance to change." The CEO gave a small nod. "Use it well," he said. "The real test of a leader is how he grows after failing." The room watched the exchange with deep respect. For the first time in years, many executives realized something important. A true leader wasn't the loudest in the room. A true leader wasn't the one with the most power. A true leader was the one who lifted others, guided others, respected others. The CEO stood slowly and walked to the front of the table. "This company," he said, "will not be known for arrogance or fear." His voice rose just slightly. "It will be known for fairness, dignity, and listening." The executives straightened in their seats, feeling a new energy rise in the room, something hopeful, something strong. "As of today," the CEO said, "we begin rebuilding our culture, together." And as the words settled across the room, the manager lowered his head, not in shame but in gratitude, because he knew he had been given something very rare in the corporate world. A second chance to become the kind of leader he had never been before. The meeting room remained silent even after the CEO finished speaking. His words hung in the air like a fresh breath after a long storm. Everyone felt it. Something inside the company had shifted, something powerful, something that made each person rethink how they behaved not just at work, but in their daily lives. The executives exchanged looks, some ashamed, some thoughtful, others inspired. They had never seen leadership like this before, leadership that didn't rely on fear or dominance, but on wisdom and respect. The manager sat in his chair, his hands still shaking slightly. He wasn't angry, he wasn't embarrassed anymore. He was humbled, deeply humbled. For years he believed that being strict and intimidating was the way to show strength, but now, sitting across from a man he had wronged without reason, he felt a different kind of strength, one he had never known. The strength to admit he was wrong, the strength to change. The CEO observed the room quietly, letting everyone absorb the moment. He didn't rush to the next topic. He understood that silence could teach more than lectures. And so he watched as each person processed the truth, their expressions shifting from tension to understanding, from fear to possibility. Finally, the executive director cleared his throat softly. "Sir, thank you," he said, "for handling this with fairness." His voice carried genuine respect, not the forced kind executives often showed to powerful people. Others nodded in agreement, murmuring words of appreciation. The CEO didn't bask in the praise, he simply nodded back politely. But there was still something he needed to address, something deeper than the manager's mistake. He reached into his folder and pulled out a small stack of papers. "Before I continue," he said, "there is something everyone must understand." He placed the papers on the table. "I came here early on purpose. The room stiffened with curiosity. The manager looked up, confused. "Early, sir?" "Yes," the CEO replied softly. "I wanted to see the company before the title of CEO walked in the door." He scanned the room slowly. "I wanted to see how people treat someone when they don't know who he is." The executives felt a jolt of realization. The test hadn't been about the meeting or the presentations. It had been about them, about their instincts, their behavior, their values. "And what I saw," the CEO continued, "told me everything I needed to know." Some executives lowered their heads, embarrassed. Others swallowed nervously, replaying the morning in their minds. Only a few had shown even basic kindness, and they now felt quiet pride. The CEO then added, "A company's true character isn't shown when the boss is watching, it's shown when they think no one is watching." His voice softened. "And today I was watching." A soft murmur spread across the room. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, knowing they could have done better. The manager looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, but the CEO's next words eased some of the tension. "I'm not here to shame anyone," he said calmly. "I'm here to rebuild." The word rebuild felt like a promise, a fresh start, a chance to correct what was broken. The CEO then turned toward the manager again, but this time his expression wasn't stern, it was human, honest. "I've been in your place before," he said quietly, surprising everyone. "I've made mistakes, I've let pride blind me, and the only reason I stand here today is because someone gave me a chance to grow." The manager's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. He whispered, "Sir, I won't waste this chance." "I know you won't," the CEO said gently. Then something unexpected happened. The janitor from earlier, who had only entered to collect trash, stood near the door watching the scene. The CEO noticed him and smiled warmly. "You," he said kindly, "thank you for greeting me with respect this morning." The janitor froze, confused. "Me, sir?" "Yes," the CEO said. "You treated me like a human being before you knew my name." A ripple of surprise moved through the executives. The simplest act, the smallest kindness, had stood out to the most powerful person in the room. The CEO looked back at the table. "This," he said softly, "is what leadership looks like. Not rank, not titles, not corner offices, but simple respect." The manager's breath caught, realizing how wrong he had been. Realizing that leadership wasn't about controlling people. It was about guiding them, inspiring them, respecting them. Just then, the CEO placed both hands on the table and said, "Let today be the day this company becomes better." He paused. "Better than yesterday, better than fear, better than assumptions." The executives nodded slowly, feeling the weight of change pressing gently but firmly against their shoulders. Change wasn't easy, but for the first time, it felt possible. The CEO smiled slightly. "Now," he said, "let's begin the real meeting." But everyone in that room knew. The real meeting had already started the moment the CEO walked in, and the company would never be the same again. When the CEO said, "Let's begin the real meeting," everyone straightened in their chairs, but the energy in the room had changed completely from only minutes earlier. It no longer felt like a place ruled by fear or hierarchy. Instead, it felt like a room where truth had finally been allowed to enter. The executives looked at the CEO with genuine respect, not because of his title, but because of the kind of leader he had proven himself to be even before the meeting officially started. The CEO began outlining his vision for the company. He spoke clearly, confidently, and with a calm passion that made people lean forward in their seats. He talked about growth, innovation, teamwork, and transparency, but above all, he spoke about culture, how a company's true power came from its people, how respect was the foundation of every successful organization, and how dignity should never depend on job titles. While he spoke, the manager sat quietly, listening more carefully than he had listened to anyone in years. His heart felt heavy, but not with fear anymore. With realization, transformation, a new understanding of leadership that he had never been taught before. He took notes, not because he wanted to impress the CEO, but because he genuinely wanted to change. The CEO noticed this, and for a moment their eyes met. The manager saw no anger in the CEO's expression, only purpose, as if the CEO believed he could become better if he truly tried. That look alone gave the manager a kind of strength he hadn't felt in a long time. Strength that didn't come from power, but from humility. After explaining the new company values, the CEO stood up and said, "Before we end this session, I want everyone to meet someone." The executives exchanged curious glances. The CEO stepped toward the door and opened it, inviting someone in. The janitor from earlier walked into the room, confused and nervous, holding his cleaning cart awkwardly. The executives blinked in surprise, some embarrassed because they hadn't spoken a single word to him all morning. The CEO gently placed a hand on the janitor's shoulder and said, "This man showed me more respect in 10 seconds than some people showed in 10 years. The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was humbling. It was real. The janitor looked down shyly. "Sir, I was just doing my job," he said softly. The CEO smiled warmly. "Kindness is never just a job." A few executives lowered their heads, realizing how often they had walked past the janitor without acknowledging him. The manager stared at the man with genuine remorse, remembering how he himself had walked past him many times without a single greeting. The CEO then announced something that surprised everyone. "From today, every department in this company will include respect training," he said. "Every employee, no matter their position, will be treated with dignity," he added. "A company that ignores its people will always fail, but a company that honors them will always rise." The words struck deep inside everyone in the room. They nodded, slowly at first, then more confidently, understanding that this wasn't just a rule, it was a promise, a new beginning. The CEO thanked the janitor personally and let him leave, but not before giving him a handshake that made the entire room rethink every assumption they had ever made about important and unimportant people. When the janitor left, the CEO addressed the team one final time. "You all have potential," he said, "but potential means nothing without humility." His voice lowered. "I don't want you to serve me. I want you to serve the company's future." The executives clapped softly at first, then louder, their applause echoing across the boardroom walls. This was not the applause of fear. It was the applause of hope, of respect, of change. When the meeting finally ended, people didn't rush out like they usually did. Instead, they walked more thoughtfully, greeting others they normally ignored. The company felt different already, as if one moment of truth had rewired the entire building. The manager lingered behind, unsure whether to approach the CEO. He hesitated before walking up slowly. "Sir," he said quietly, "I want to thank you, not for the second chance but for opening my eyes." The CEO looked at him calmly and replied, "Then use your eyes wisely from now on." The manager nodded. "I will. I promise." And the CEO believed him, not because of his words, but because of the sincerity in his voice. As the CEO walked out of the boardroom and into the hallway, employees stood a little straighter, smiled a little warmer, and acknowledged each other more respectfully. The entire building felt lighter, as if a heavy curtain had finally been lifted. Down in the lobby, the receptionist saw the CEO again and smiled with wide, surprised eyes. "Sir, welcome officially," she said shyly. The CEO smiled back. "You welcomed me from the beginning?" She blushed with pride, not knowing that her small kindness earlier had left a deeper impression than she ever imagined. And so, the story of a stranger in the lobby became the story of a new leader, a new culture, a new future. A story where a simple moment of prejudice became a turning point for an entire company. A story where kindness proved more powerful than rank. A story where humility reshaped everything. The man who was removed from the meeting had become the man who transformed the company. Not through anger, not through ego, but through wisdom, patience, and truth. And from that day forward, everyone in that building remembered one lesson for the rest of their careers. You never know who you're speaking to, so speak with respect always.